Imagine this. You're sitting just inside the edge of a cave, maybe 30,000 years ago. The fire has burned down to a red, pulsing heart. Outside, the wind is dragging itself across a frozen plain. You can smell the cold. It has a metallic tang, like iron and old snow. Every few seconds, you hear the yipping of something out in the dark, a pack moving across the valley. Your hand finds the heavy flint scraper by your thigh. Your body is primed for it. The rush, the smell of musk, the lunge of a gray shape at the firelight. That's what should happen. That's what your brain is wired to expect. A predator, a threat, fight or flight. But it's not happening. Instead, there's a wolf sitting just outside the ring of light. It's been there for an hour. It's not pacing. It's not growling. Its ears twitch when a child murmurs in sleep. Its head is resting on its paws. And something in you, something older than words, has decided not to throw the rock. Your heartbeat is slow. You can feel a question forming that you don't have language for yet. This should be wrong. This should be death. But it isn't. That moment, that impossible, biologically absurd moment, is the one we're going to try to understand. Because from that flash of mutual tolerance, we got every dog curled at the foot of your bed, every purring cat kneading your chest at 4 a.m., every sheep bleating on a hillside, every horse that carried a human across a continent. Why did ancient humans suddenly start living with wild animals? The word suddenly is doing a lot of work there, and it's the key to the entire mystery. Because for hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors looked at wild animals and saw exactly two things: food or danger. There was no third category. A wolf wasn't a potential friend. A mouflon wasn't a future wool sweater. An aurochs wasn't a milk source waiting to be tapped. The mental architecture for a companion animal simply didn't exist. And then, in a blink of geological time, it did. The paradox is that we should have eaten them or run from them, but we didn't. We began to live with them, not just tolerate them, not just capture them, live with them. And that shift wasn't a technology. It was a rewiring of the human soul. So let's start with the physical. What actually happened? What bones and stones can tell us, the cold, hard layer of this anomaly. The oldest physical evidence of something that looks like a dog living alongside humans comes from sites that make most paleoanthropologists very, very nervous, because they keep getting older. In Goyet Cave, Belgium, a canine skull dated to around 36,000 years ago has skull proportions that don't quite match any wolf population from the same time. It's not a full dog, but it's not a pure wolf either. Something's happening. A few thousand years later, in what's now the Czech Republic, at a site called Predmosti, we find wolf-like dogs buried with mammoth bone jewelry. But here is where it gets stranger. At a cave called Razbernikia in Siberia, a skull from about 33,000 years ago shows clear domestic dog traits. A shorter snout, crowded teeth, but it coexisted with a robust wolf population in the exact same region. So it's not that wolves were simply evolving into dogs across the board. Some wolves became something else, and they did it right next to their wild cousins. That's not a slow, linear domestication. That's a split, a choice, a divergence that happened in proximity. Then there's the burial. 14,000 years ago, in what's now Western Germany, at a place called Bonn-Oberkassel, a dog was buried curled up next to two humans. The dog had suffered from distemper, a disease that would have killed it without intensive care. Someone had spoon-fed it water. Someone had kept it warm. It had lived through a sickness that would have been fatal in the wild. And when it died, they didn't throw the body away. They laid it down with the tenderness we reserve for kin. This is the physical layer of the anomaly. Bones don't lie, but bones don't answer the real question either. Why did that first wolf sit down in the firelight? And why didn't that first human run? To get to that, we have to move from the physical to the psychological layer. We have to talk about what changed inside human minds. Because the default state of a wild human meeting a wild wolf is mutual terror followed by violence. It still is. You can go to places in the world where wolves have never been pressured by people, and they don't sit down at the edge of camp. They flee, or they test your defenses. So something shifted in the way our brains processed an animal's face, its vocalization, its body language. Some anthropologists call it the social cognitive extension. Essentially, humans are so obsessively social that our brains constantly seek to read intention into everything. A rustle in the grass could be a predator's intention. A crack in the ice could be intention. It's a hyperactive agency detection system. It keeps us alive, but it also means we look at a wolf and see a mind, not just a beast. And somewhere along the line, some humans began to see not just a mind. They saw a mind that could be collaborated with, not trained, not dominated, collaborated. There's a famous study by Brian Hare and his colleagues on the domestication hypothesis. They showed that domesticated dogs can follow a human pointing gesture spontaneously. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, can't do this without extensive training. Wolves, even hand-raised ones, struggle. But a puppy from a shelter, with zero training, will follow your finger to a hidden piece of food as if it's the most natural thing in the world. That ability is called theory of mind in a rudimentary form, the ability to read human communicative intent. And here's the twist. It wasn't just us breeding it into them. It was also them breeding it into us. Living with wolves that could read our gestures meant we selected, consciously or not, for the ones that understood us. And as they changed, so did we. Our brains began to release oxytocin when we looked into a dog's eyes, the same hormone that floods a mother's system when she gazes at her infant. Modern neuroscience has just uncovered something darker. This oxytocin loop is mutual. When a dog stares into your eyes, its oxytocin levels rise too. We hijacked each other's bonding chemistry. That's not a one-way domestication. That's a co-evolutionary embrace. But we're still not at the deepest layer. Because chemistry and psychology explain the relationship once it started. They don't explain the ignition spark. To understand that, we need to go to the chemical and neurological layer. Specifically, we need to talk about something called domestication syndrome and the neural crest hypothesis. Domestication syndrome is this bizarre constellation of traits that appear in almost every domesticated mammal, from dogs to pigs to sheep to horses to even domesticated foxes. Floppy ears, shorter snouts, curly tails, depigmented patches of fur, reduced aggression, smaller brains, juvenile behavior retained into adulthood. For over a century, scientists noticed this pattern but couldn't explain it. Why would selecting for tameness, simply choosing the animals that were least fearful of humans, produce a cascade of seemingly unrelated physical changes? In 2014, a team of researchers proposed the neural crest cell hypothesis. During early development, a tiny ribbon of stem cells called the neural crest migrates through the embryo and gives rise to a startling range of structures. The adrenal glands, which produce adrenaline and fear responses, portions of the skull and jaw, pigmentation cells, and even parts of the brain. If you select for a less reactive adrenal system, you are essentially selecting for a slightly delayed or reduced migration of neural crest cells. And the side effects are exactly what you see in every domesticated animal. A shorter snout, a smaller skull, a white patch on the forehead, floppy ears. Domestication isn't about teaching an animal to be friendly. It's about accidentally reshaping its entire developmental biology, all by choosing the one that didn't run away. But here's the reveal. For decades, we told the story like this. Humans decided to domesticate wolves. They stole puppies from dens, killed the aggressive ones, fed the tame ones, and gradually bred a new species. It's a story of human agency, human mastery. But the neural crest evidence suggests something far more interesting. The initial step, the very first step, was almost certainly not a human choice. It was a wolf choice. Some wolves discovered a new ecological niche. Human refuse. Bones, scraps, piles of discarded meat. Wolves that were slightly less fearful, slightly less weak. So the paradox that opened this story, the wolf that should have been a threat but wasn't, was never about human courage. It was about a loophole in the chemistry of fear. And once that loophole opened, the flood came. By 8,000 years ago, we had goats, sheep, pigs, cattle. By 5,000 years ago, horses, donkeys, camels. Each domestication followed a similar pattern. Wild animals drawn to human-altered landscapes, a slow filtering for reduced fear, and then an acceleration as both species became irrevocably entangled. The cat, for instance, domesticated itself almost entirely. Wildcats began hunting the rodents that infested early grain stores in the Fertile Crescent. The ones that were slightly bolder, slightly more tolerant of human noise, thrived. Today's house cat genome is barely distinguishable from that of the Near Eastern wildcat. They walked into our lives and basically stayed the same animal, still half wild, still ready to leave if the contract breaks. And that's the climax moment. The line that flips the meaning of the entire premise. We didn't invite them in. They chose us. But that statement doesn't just reframe domestication. It reframes what it means to be human. Because it means that our identity as a species, the species that paints caves, builds cities, domesticates animals, is not solely the product of our own genius. It's partly the product of another species' decision to tolerate us. The wolf that walked into the firelight didn't become a dog. It became the part of us that could love something other than itself. And that capacity, that wild gift, is not a human invention. It's a shared biological artifact, born in the flicker of a campfire, written in neural crest cells, sealed with a mutual gaze. Think of it like a system update. For most of our evolutionary history, human social cognition ran on a closed-source platform. You understood your kin, your band, maybe the spirits in the storm. Then a piece of wild code, a wolf's reduced flight distance, entered the system. It wasn't a hack. It was a bug that turned out to be a feature. And suddenly the software could do things it was never designed to do. It could extend empathy across species lines. It could share territory, share food, share gaze, share oxytocin. The update installed, and once it was in, it couldn't be removed. We started seeing minds in crows, in horses, in the woolly mammoth that we painted on a cave wall. We had learned to live with animals, not because we conquered them, but because a tiny ribbon of stem cells migrated a little differently in a wolf embryo 10,000 generations ago. That's the sensory anomaly fully unwrapped. The fear you should have felt in that cave wasn't overcome by bravery. It was dissolved by chemistry, by mutual domestication. The wolf that sat outside the fire was already rewiring your brain before you ever reached out your hand. So the next time a dog leans against your leg and sighs, remember, you're not petting a tamed wolf. You're completing a circuit that began 30,000 years ago in the dark, when two species decided, without words, that they were safer together than apart. And that decision, made by a creature that had no concept of decision, changed what it means to be human. We are not the sole authors of our own story. We are co-authors with a wild animal that had the audacity to stay.